if your principal says A and the whole world says B, it's your job, if you believe you're right, to stand your ground and say, no, I'm not going to move, you move.
It had to do with true religion, or as, Bonhoeffer was saying, God doesn't want religion.
Yeah, he wants true worship following Christ.
He was a pacifist.
Yeah.
Pretty much his whole life, with seemingly one exception where he was part of a group that was planning to assassinate Hitler. Hitler had a new version of the Bible printed where Jesus was an Aryan and there was more commandments than
12
just 10.
commandments. The church should be the conscience of the state, but it should not be interwoven with the state.
Hello and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey guys.
It's our first time all back together in the same room in a little while.
Yeah.
So enjoy that marvelousness that you're getting to witness on your screen.
And in your ears.
Our topic today is Bonhoeffer the movie that was just released by Angel Studios. It's been a couple weeks since it came out.
What's the full title, actually?
That's important.
Just
actually.
Bonhoeffer,
No.
but the subtitle
Oh,
is
okay.
Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, Assassin.
Okay. I thought that was part
But
of the
main title is just Bonhoeffer.
Okay.
Yeah. Or Bonhoeffer if you're an American.
Or, yeah.
As an American, it looks like Bonhoeffer.
I don't know how the Germans pronounce it. Is it Bonhoeffer? Is that how they pronounce it?
What are you studying in German?
Yeah, that's how they said it in the movie. I'd always thought his first name was Dietrich, but they all say Dietrich in the movie.
Yeah, that's true.
If we had a German scholar.
Yeah, if only.
Germans in the audience, let us know.
Yes.
I know according to our stats, there are a few.
Oh, really?
Unless those are all just people using VPNs.
VPNs. No, we've got fans in Germany. We are Misters worldwide.
We have to believe this.
Yeah. All right. But before we really get started, remember to like and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, or whatever it's called now, Apple Music, wherever you find us. Hit that bell on YouTube so you know when a video drops. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Tell your friends about us. That really helps. And we're on to the show.
All right.
So we all went and saw Bonhoeffer the movie.
Yep.
I saw it a couple weeks ago, but y'all just saw it this week, I think.
Yeah.
Correct.
So who is Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Thomas?
Well, he is a powerful figure from Germany during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of a martyr figure.
Yeah.
He was a Christian who opposed Hitler.
I hate Hitler.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the core of why he's famous.
Yeah. He was a prolific writer.
A minister ordained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a pastor. He was executed right before the war ended.
A matter of weeks, if I recall.
Yeah, it was 3 weeks between Bonhoeffer's execution and Hitler's suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the death throes of the Nazi party, they kind of just offed a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it was cleanup or attempted cover-up, cleanup kind of stuff. And then in this instance, I think it was more of, I think Hitler had personally ordered his execution, and they eventually followed through on it.
Yeah, what I read was that Hitler read the diary of the organization Bonhoeffer was part of, and you said that.
Yeah, up there. It was
Abwehr.
It was the German military intelligence office.
Okay, well, anyhow, the diary of the group that was trying to assassinate Hitler found that diary,
yes,
read it,
yeah,
and was so incensed by what he read that he ordered Bonhoeffer to be executed, and all the other members.
Bonhoeffer's name was among other conspirators, and several were members of the Abwehr.
Yeah. So this movie kind of covers Bonhoeffer's life from 1930 to the end of his life, 1945.
Well, it also touches on his childhood briefly,
just
in the
briefly.
early 19-teens and the Great War and the death of his brother in the Great War.
Yeah.
And some of those influential life moments that kind of led him in the direction that he took. Shaped him.
Yeah. I found that opening sequence where Bonhoeffer's a little boy and his older brother's going off to the war. I found that very touching. You know, I don't know if I was just in a silly, weepy mood or something, but I don't know. That got to me.
It was touching to me as well. Yeah, I found it rather emotional.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of because everybody knows, the nature of World War I and how many ended up dying. And
for no reason at all, especially in World War I. You had people charging a field and just falling dead without accomplishing anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know if they were trying to suggest, because it wasn't explicit, but if I think there was clearly the suggestion in the movie that his older brother's death impacted his own views on war.
Yeah, because he was a pacifist.
Yeah.
Pretty much his whole life, with seemingly one exception where he was part of a group that was planning to assassinate Hitler.
Yeah, and so the movie makes it very, well, I don't know, very clear, pretty clear that he was well aware of the assassination plot and had given it a thumbs up. And I don't know if history is as clear that he was that well. I think he knew about some of these, but I don't know if he was as involved as it makes it seem.
Yeah, the movie makes it very clear. He expounds an argument for why, as a pacifist, he is changing his mind and saying it's okay to assassinate Hitler.
Well, yeah, clearly in the film, the subtitle, it is assassin is used in this subtitle. And also in some of the advertisements, there are pictures depicting him holding a gun and things like that.
Oh, I didn't see those.
Yeah. And so I don't know if that's just marketing stuff, but I think the reality of the situation, and the movie makes it fairly clear that he was not directly involved, but some of the advertisements and some of the title and stuff paint a different picture up front, which I think is probably unnecessary and maybe takes away some of the power of the movie. But I do think that the movie characterized his ideas towards pacifism pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So
with that.
more than likely, from what we know, he was involved in this organization that he knew of at least 5.
And his brother-in-law was heavily involved.
Yes.
And certainly I didn't check this detail, but I feel confident that his brother-in-law did in fact know about the assassination.
Yeah. Bonhoeffer likely knew of up to 5 different plots.
Yeah.
But he was not actively participating in them.
Right. No.
Now, I think the one plot that was the closest to killing or assassinating Hitler was the July 20 plot, and I think that was in 1943.
Okay. Is that the one that's in the movie?
No.
Okay.
There was it was a briefcase, a bomb that was placed under a table near where Hitler was, and it did go off, but the way it was arranged, and I think even the sheer immensity of the table, the wood from the table kind of
just protected him.
Ended up protecting him. And
so as you can tell from our discussion here, the movie doesn't go heavily into details of all these assassination plots. Really, only one of them is touched on in the movie, because that's not, despite the fact that the movie is about Bonhoeffer's opposition to Nazism and especially their takeover of the church in Germany, the details of the assassinations, it's just not the focus. The focus is on Bonhoeffer's personal, not really much inner struggle, but on his personal journey into this person who is staunchly, publicly, loudly opposed to Nazism and the idea of basically worshiping Hitler.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought the movie did a good job of using a lot of the language that I believe is correct about his positions that he held publicly, some of the things that he preached from the pulpit, some of the letters that he wrote, his ideas of clearly Jesus is the head of the church.
You're right.
And his position of the church should be the conscience of the state, but it should not be interwoven with the state.
Yeah, definite separation there. A separation of responsibility,
right?
But a recognition of what those roles are. And I think what happens often is people fear one or the other becoming, like you said, this interweaving of
which is what Hitler did.
Right. Hitler had a new version of the Bible printed where Jesus was an Aryan and there was more commandments.
12 commandments.
Yeah. And I think there was a movement at some point, because of the Old Testament being a Jewish book, to have that expunged.
Yeah. So the movie goes into some of these details, but it's really trying to kind of have a coherent narrative, and so it doesn't dive in too deep on any of this stuff. And I think it does quite a good job on that, but it also kind of jumps back and forth between his last days in captivity and his journey to get there.
Yeah.
What I thought was one of the most interesting relationships in the movie is his relationship with Niemöller, who is in the movie depicted as Bonhoeffer's bishop, who at first Bonhoeffer gets back from America where he had been and maybe that's where he first truly accepted Jesus into his heart. He comes back and finds that the Nazis are taking over the church and he's opposed to it. Niemöller kind of says, hang on, don't lose your head here. You would literally lose your head if you say some of these things. And then later in the movie, Niemöller's like, you were totally right. I should not have gone along with this. And of course, Niemöller, if you don't know that name, I didn't know the name before I watched the movie either, but he's the one who has that extremely famous quote. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the labor unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a labor unionist, etc. And when they come for me, I wonder if there will be anyone left to speak out for me.
Right.
And that is, I think, probably the most powerful scene in the movie to me when Niemöller is giving that sermon.
Certainly.
Because there's just that moment where he kind of yells at the Nazi, look at me. And I don't know, it really does a good job depicting courage in the face of certain doom, especially from a pastor speaking out against the Nazis in the later 1930s or early 40s, whenever that was.
Yeah. What was the main theme, would you say, or the biggest theme from this movie?
I would say it is courage in the face of tyranny and the steadfastness of one's principles and living by one's principles even to the gallows.
Yeah, to quote Captain America.
I believe this is yours, Captain America.
I would say the message is, if your principle says, this is a paraphrase, but if your principle says A and the whole world says B, it's your job, if you believe you're right, to stand your ground and say, no, I'm not going to move, you move.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the main theme.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I picked up the theme that I kept seeing was more of a theological one, but it had to do with true religion, or as, Bonhoeffer was saying, God doesn't want religion.
Yeah, he wants true worship following Christ.
Right. Yeah, and that is consistent with Bonhoeffer in the sense that he became very convicted about being a follower of Jesus. That's one of the things that he really hit on after he was in the States and came back, and I think his conversion experience in the States,
particularly in the black churches in Harlem.
Right. It was your heart is in it, you're not just doing the works of religion.
Yeah, and it's not just an intellectual exercise.
It's not big cathedrals and choirs and hymnals and all that stuff. That's not what Christianity is.
The German church had become in many ways at that time.
Yeah, and I think it was part of also why the German church was susceptible,
maybe?
To the way the Nazis were kind of taking them over and controlling them.
Because I would agree with that assessment.
It had become kind of more of a rote work oriented.
It was in so many ways almost like
lacking faith.
It's an academic, or a philosophical, or exercise,
or just a comfortable norm,
a cultural fixture, even.
Which is, there's definitely churches in the world today that are, I think, guilty of that. I haven't ever been there, but that's what I have understood the current Church of England to be like.
Well, I think the churches
liberalizing of the churches.
I think the churches in Germany are like that too, from what I understand.
What's interesting too to note, and this is kind of a side note, when the communists took over a lot of countries, one of the things they do is they just seek to eradicate religion.
Yeah.
The Nazis didn't want to eradicate it necessarily, but what they wanted to do was, take it over and then control it and then be able to use it to message their message the way they wanted to message it. So
I wonder if we've seen anything like that in modern day.
Well, it's interesting because I think that when you're opposed directly, it's easier to see the enemy maybe.
Yeah.
When it starts to become more of a infiltration of certain ideas into, and then beginning to push them to become accepted and everything, and that corrupting aspect, it almost makes it harder in some senses to see or appreciate the danger.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets into what I want the second half of this discussion to be. So let's go ahead and wrap up our discussion of the movie.
Okay.
And then we'll get into that other stuff, Thomas. So we saw this movie. It's from Angel Studios, who we've talked about some of their other movies, The Story of Possum Trot, or at least I talked about that. And
The Blind.
No, The Blind is not them.
No,
The Blind is
Blind
somebody else.
Is the
Oh yeah, they're their own studio.
Yeah, but The Sound of Freedom is Angel Studios.
That's right.
Yeah. And that was the really smash hit last year.
Mm-hmm.
They're a great studio. They've got another movie coming in December that it's hard to tell, but I think it's kind of meant to be a story of Noah's Ark set in the modern day. The one about anyhow, I can't remember the name.
Is it the
like Fortress or something?
Yeah.
the
Homestead.
Homestead,
Homestead,
the
that's
end of
the-
the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm motivated to see that one.
Well, we won't
It
be able to
looked-
talk about it on the podcast because
kind
it'll be
of-
untimely, but
kind of, I don't know.
We'll see.
I'm interested in
I'll
it
probably
at the
go
very
see it
least.
just on my own.
Yeah. Well, then you can tell me how you like it.
I shall.
Well, anyhow, we like their movies. They are, I think, an explicitly Christian studio.
Yeah, they are.
And, you can feel safe going to see their movies.
Well,
it may not be the
According
best
to
movie you've ever seen.
some
but
sources, there are white nationalist, far right, extremist studios.
That have a lot of black actors. By the way,
And why's that? Cause I'm a black man.
did you notice at the beginning of this film? This is the first time I've noticed it. I don't think I've seen too many Angel Studio films anyway, but they had that little blurb at the very beginning that this had been rated by Angel Studios as
well, so if you don't know, that's how the studio works is
right rates
the
itself.
script you can buy in for, a couple $100 or something into the Angel Studios Guild, I think is what they call it.
Okay.
And then all the scripts that they want to make into movies have to be passed around the guild.
Okay, and then it gets
And
this
it has to
rating.
get like a 95% of the guild says, yes, make this movie before they will.
That's
take it
what
to
that was.
production.
Okay, I thought that was interesting. I had never seen anything like that.
Yeah. Well, it's not a normal way of doing things,
Yeah.
but it's the way they do it.
It's sort of like, well, I guess it's not a Kickstarter type of thing, but it's just a rating.
It's a quality control.
Quality
kind of thing.
control. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Anyhow, so this is the movie Bonhoeffer that we saw. So let's rate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Andrew, out of 10, how would you rate this movie?
I think it was well filmed. I think most of the acting was pretty good. Some of the acting was a little bit off, but not terrible. I would say there were a few confusing parts. It wasn't until after the fact, reading up on his life, that I found out a key part of his work was freeing Jews into Switzerland.
Well, there's a whole scene about that.
Yes, but it's not made clear, in my opinion. It wasn't made clear that that was like the biggest part of his work. It felt like a little side quest to me. And it wasn't even super clear that that's what they were up to until like they were at the border and then they found, okay, we're freeing these people. So, and I still have some questions about that. Anyway, I won't go further down that road. I wish that could have been a little bit more clear and prominent. I'm not terribly happy with the word assassin in there because I think it's maybe a mischaracterization.
Well, it's
and
certainly
you
true
are
that
a
he didn't-
marketing guy, so you would appreciate that kind of.
Yeah, and it's certainly true that Bonhoeffer didn't actually assassinate anyone.
anybody.
Right. Precisely. So,
All right, but out of 10.
all of that, I'll be generous and give it a 7.
Oh, okay. All right. Thomas.
So, I'm giving it a 6. So I'll just give you my rating right off the bat and then explain it. I do think that cinematography was its best element. I thought it looked
Yeah, it looked great.
the quality looked good. The acting was relatively good. The writing made it a little bit tougher on the actors. I'm going to be honest. I think the actors would have been challenged with some of the writing. It was a little bit wooden, a little bit stiff in times. And so that was not a huge thing. I would say that it was, some characters were very believable. Other characters, I felt they were trying to push it. The timing or what's a better word for this?
Pacing.
The pacing of the film, I felt was a little off. It wasn't bad, but a little off. I felt sometimes they maybe spend a little bit too much time in certain things, and I wasn't sure why. Like you were talking about the way they handled this seeming side plot with the Jews, and you weren't quite sure what was going on with it. And they didn't do a good job of kind of depicting or explaining it beyond that. It was kind of, here we go. And one of the other ones was when he goes to back to the States in 39, and it's not really clear why he goes to the States. The implication he's almost like running away from, because I think that happened supposedly that happened around the failed assassination plot. I can't remember exactly.
In the movie, it
In the movie.
appears to be that he leaves for America just before the assassination happens.
Right. And so then
attempt.
So then it's like he's running away just in case it goes bad. And then he feels guilty, or he's convicted by the pastor friend of his there that he needs to be back in Germany. And so then he goes back to Germany, which then subsequently he's arrested. So some of that timing is a little off and wasn't clear as far as what they were trying to say the story was. So that was a little confusing. And so that was another element that I kind of it's a few things. Overall, like I said, I think it's a good movie, decent movie, but still for me, it was a 6. Yeah. And I'll leave it at that.
Alrighty.
Can I make one more interjection?
Yes.
One thing that I really, really liked about it was I do feel like it brought forth really solid theological positions that people need to hear.
Yeah.
And I thought that was wonderful. And, you know, if I could rate it just on that, I'd probably put it closer to like a 9.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of perspective on it is kind of going to come into my review here. So just so you know, we are clearly not talking heads that are given a script and told to just say, you know, whatever is good, because I am somewhat dismayed by y'all's low rating. I think I would probably give this like an 8.5. I thought it was quite a powerful movie, both at the beginning and throughout. And at the end, there are scenes that I especially found impactful. And I think that's more than, you know, the writing in every single scene or the cinematography, which I agree was good. I think how the scenes make you feel is the most important part of a movie. And I thought there were several scenes that made me feel what they wanted me to feel.
Sure.
Throughout the movie, beginning, middle, and end. And especially, as you were saying, theologically, there is kind of this ongoing theme of, at the beginning of the movie, Bonhoeffer is witnessed to by his friends in the church in Harlem. And then he comes back and visits his family, and he's witnessing to them about what he saw, vibrant, living church in America, and how he would like that to be the church in Germany. And then he's having fights with the clergy in Germany about we have to worship Christ, not Hitler. And then he goes and he teaches a seminar. Anyhow, throughout the movie, he is witnessing to people. And then at the end, there's a scene where all of his fellow prisoners basically are expecting to be hung the next morning. I think he was one of the only ones who actually was hung. But he gives them the Lord's Supper. He performs the Lord's Supper, communion for them. And there's a moment where this German scientist who's been imprisoned with him, who was kind of buddy-buddy with Hitler at one point and then fell out of favor, is standing there as the Lord's Supper is being given out, and he turns and walks away. As all these other prisoners, who some of them were not savory characters either, were trying to accept the redemption that Bonhoeffer is trying to communicate to them from Jesus. Mm-hmm. And that was powerful. Watching the scientist walk out of the room, I was just like, oh man, that just struck me, because there's so many people who we would love to see redeemed who will not accept the free gift of redemption.
Certainly.
And I think it avoids being preachy, which I know is ironic considering what I just said. It talks a lot about Christ because Bonhoeffer was a strong Christian, and it talks a lot about the Christian faith, and there's sermons in the movie, but it doesn't ever bring the plot to a screeching halt and say, here's the lesson you're supposed to walk away from the movie with, which is what a lot of these kinds of movies will do. I think it does a very good job of making you want to go find out more about Bonhoeffer. You know, there's details that aren't clear. I don't actually know that I was 100% clear in the movie when he got arrested by the Germans finally.
Yeah.
But it kind of didn't seem to matter to me anyhow. And it did make me want to go find out more. And there's some books that I plan on reading about Bonhoeffer now. And I have one of his books as well that I hope to read one day, but it's a little bit denser.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, my rating is 8.5 out of 10. I thought it was a very strong movie. In my opinion, the best from Angel Studios that I've seen. Not that I haven't liked the others. I just like this one more.
Excellent. Yep. I certainly would encourage people to go see it.
Yeah. So several of the themes in this movie, moving on to the second part of our discussion here, made me think of things you've been bringing up, Thomas.
Yeah.
Which is, there is this kind of, we've called it the woke right before, which I really don't like that term, but there is seemingly, I think it's mostly young people who are toying with some literal Nazi rhetoric.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to describe it. It's the Jews are bad. They're making us second-class citizens in our own country. I've actually had someone say that to me on Twitter.
Yeah.
And we're against that. We don't like that.
Yeah.
So, Thomas, you're the one who's been bringing this up, if you want to.
Yeah, I think, and maybe to put it in a bigger causal or possibly causal reason why we're witnessing this. It's, we've talked about before how with the left going so hard left and going into the woke land with their identity politics and everything and the oppressor-oppressed dynamic, they labeled and repeatedly have labeled, white man, white people, males as the worst offenders of being, the worst, the racist, the oppressor. They are. Well, people have been warning, and I think Jordan Peterson is an example, that the problem with that is eventually what you're going to do is create an environment for those that you've demonized to suddenly kind of swing back in the same kind.
Yeah.
Right. And so when, the term woke, right, is kind of trying to, I think, elucidate that this is a reactionary movement to that on the left. Most of these are white young men who have been demonized by culture for so long, that toxic masculinity, all this other stuff. So masculinity, what that is, being masculine, leaning into that is a big deal. That's important. Yeah. So,
and we agree that that's important.
We agree that that's important, but they take it kind of to the Andrew Tate extreme, where it's just like working out, being tough, being a man,
getting lots of women. Yeah.
Then there's elements that try to put more ethnic flavor to ethical flavor to it by saying, well, it's not about sleeping around or anything like that, but it's like you are the man. And so as the man, the head of the household, what does this mean? How do you run your house? All these things. How does that play into it? And so then it's kind of morphed or expanded into and taken on an element of culture. Like, what is the culture that we, and especially for Christians, what is Christian culture that we want to see expanded? And that's where you get into the Christian nationalism stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you start to hear this rhetoric that sounds eerily similar to what the Nazis were saying.
I think, just to interject real quick, a lot of this is coming about because, as you were mentioning, the far left uses these terms so incredibly loosely. That terms like white nationalist, white supremacy, Nazi, Hitler, they've all lost their meaning. They've lost their saltiness.
Right.
So you have a lot of people who've been told, you're a Nazi, you're a white supremacist for years just because of who they were born, the color of their skin. And so they're like, well, fine, maybe the white supremacists had some good ideas. I think that's some of what's happening.
I think there's definitely an element of that in it. And, if you start using it so loosely and applying it so broadly that when somebody asks, well, I know I'm not a bad person necessarily. And if this is what they're calling me, well, maybe I should investigate and find out what this is.
Yeah, maybe those weren't actually bad people.
And so there's this element of like, question everything you've ever been told. It's probably a lie. So let's, and that's why you have these Holocaust deniers coming out of this. Or not fully denying the Holocaust, but using kind of questions of like, was it really 6 million Jews?
Right.
Maybe it was only 1 million Jews. Or, all these kinds of questioning the narrative, or in a buzz phrase that has come out of this is what they call the post-war consensus, which is this word that is kind of a wax nose term because
I don't know what that means. Wax nose
means you can shift it or apply it to any a multitude of different things depending on what you're talking about. Like post-war consensus on what? Trucks?
Right.
I mean, and so what they mean though is that the Nazis, and specifically National Socialism, was intentionally demonized beyond what it really was by the winning allies who were more liberal, because they wanted to prevent any kind of nationalistic system like this to ever rise again. And so it was unfairly demonized, is would be their argument.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, you mentioned the denial of 6 million Jews. You know, maybe there was some Holocaust, but it wasn't. I think that's part of it. They're saying, oh, they made up these numbers to make you see this as the worst thing that's ever happened. Yeah. And, you know, I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it until I go blue in the face. My grandfather met a lot of these concentration camp survivors, and they were skin and bones. And he communicated to me just how bad that was and how it should never, ever happen again. And I've seen pictures, and
it's called eyewitness testimony.
Right. And he was not lying to me.
So given the context of this Bonhoeffer film and what we're talking about now, one of the tough things when you're doing like a biopic or something like this is it's hard to look at history in the hindsight.
Yeah.
Because you already know who like the Nazis were and what terrible things they did. And so, you know, one of the things you're growing up, at least I growing up as kid, maybe you guys similar, you learn about the Nazis and everything like this. And one of the questions, unfortunately, that you kind of wrestle with or you just take for granted is, well, yeah, they're totally bad. How would anybody have fallen for these clowns?
Yeah, there's always the question, you know, the famous, you're in a high school lecture and it's like, how many of you would have opposed the Nazis?
Yeah, right.
You know, and everyone, of course, raises their hand. And it's like, no, you wouldn't have. You definitely wouldn't have, because it happens like a frog in the boiling water.
Yeah. Here's a question. Did you speak out against vaccine mandates during COVID? If not, you would not have opposed the Nazis. That's a pretty good litmus test for that one.
Yeah. And so I think what this movie at least is helpful for, you could say, is he is recognizing first principles. And I think what happens is either people haven't been educated to understand what that means, or they just assume they know what it means or whatnot. But your first principles are your foundation by which your worldview is completely constructed upon. And of course you have to make sure that foundation is the truth.
Yeah. Build your house upon the rock.
So that you can then, as you are getting all kinds of differing information or trying to understand and unpack things you're being told, you have a foundation by which you can start sniffing out, or red flags start popping up and saying, wait, there's an inconsistency here. Something is fishy here. You know, something's not right in Denmark here. There's things that pop up to you if your foundation's well built and you can start recognizing things that are being said or things that are like problematic. Now, none of us are perfect in this. We all have blind spots.
Yeah.
But one of the things is the notion that we can question everything in all history. You know, we've heard this so many times. History is written by the victors, right? That's not entirely true. History is written by historians, and historians are not all liars. And the notion that somehow the victors are always going to portray their enemies as bad or on the wrong side of history, as Obama used to like to say, it's a nuance. It's not a hard and fast rule. And so what happens is it's accepted as this hard and fast rule. And so what revisionists come in and say, we're going to go back and find the real history.
Yeah.
And so that means anybody who says this happened, our automatic response is going to be stiff skepticism to the point of rejection.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of this. So you have all these young men, they've been demonized or feel demonized one way or the other. This other group comes along and says, were the Nazis really that bad? Were the Jews really victims?
Did God really say thou shalt not eat of the fruit?
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Right. And so I think that what's troubling is it's not by any means at this point a major.
It's not a major movement. I don't see anyone influential
movement
espousing this really.
Right. But it's definitely out there.
Yeah. And it has decent numbers.
It does have, unfortunately, bigger numbers. And, you know, remember, what's the social media platform that is notorious for the racists? Gab.
Oh, okay. Gab. Yeah.
Or
4chan. Yeah.
Yeah, 4chan's probably like the bigger one, but
worse?
Gab is one too.
Gab is the more recent one. 4chan is, you know,
it's kind of
famous for being troublemakers.
Yeah, that's kind of the OG white supremacist hangout spot.
But also any other, you know, off group hangout spot was also on 4chan. It's if you're a troublemaker of any description, pretty much back in the day, 4chan is where you went.
Yeah.
So in those kind of like, I guess you could say fringe platforms, because they're not really the mainstream. It's people who get on them know what they are, and or if you get on and you don't know what they are and you learn pretty quick what it is, you're probably like, I don't want to be in here. But it seems like that there's ways in which, when it's obvious blatant racism as it is, then people can usually get shot down pretty fast. But what happens is when they interject kind of these more, we're just questioning the narrative. We're just questioning. And then it emboldens, and then you start seeing people that are just blatant like this.
Yeah. Well, what I've seen is it's a different kind of subtle where I've seen this, especially on X, not that I think X is full of white supremacists or anything, but lots of people are on X.
Yeah.
Twitter, X is what I'm talking about. These people who will say things that I agree with like 95% of what they're saying. And then I had this happen. I used the term Judeo-Christian, and they're like, just cut that Judeo part out. It's a psyop that Judaism and Christianity share anything in common. I was like,
you got to be kidding me. A psyop?
Jesus' values.
The origin. It's Jesus.
Jesus' values were Jewish values.
Yes, he was a Jew.
You don't have Christianity without the Old Testament.
You don't. And largely, most Orthodox Jews today practice a system of virtue that aligns with the Christian system of virtue. And so those two groups can coexist quite well. We believe...
We both share the 10 Commandments, which is a base moral code.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that gets to your point, Thomas, about first principles.
Yeah.
And the foundational principles of our nation, and how many people have forgotten that. Yeah. But that doesn't mean if you admit that or acknowledge these things that you're somehow a Christian nationalist or somehow like some kind of a supremacist, and because you say that, Jesus essentially is the foundation, the principles of Christianity, it's the foundation of the West.
Right. That's true. That is canonical.
It doesn't make you a theocrat. And I think that the term Christian nationalism it's so hard to actually define what that means.
Well, I can give a description for who I would call a Christian nationalist. So often you hear people called Christian nationalists and it's just not true. So let me see. I had this quote highlighted and I messed it up. So let me get back to it. Okay. So this is from C.S. Lewis, The Screwtape Letters, which is where a demon is giving advice to a lesser demon on how to tempt a man to going to hell, basically. Let him, your patient, your human being you're tempting, let him begin by treating patriotism or pacifism as part of his religion. Then let him, under the influence of partisan spirit, come to regard it as the most important part, the patriotism. Then quietly and gradually nurse him on to the stage at which the religion becomes merely part of the cause, in which Christianity is chiefly valued because of the excellent arguments it can produce in favor of the American patriotism or pacifism or whatever it is. And then once you've made the world an end and faith a means, you have almost won your man, and it makes very little difference what kind of worldly end he is pursuing.
Yeah.
So when the worldly end is Christianity controlling America or Christian culture controlling America, that's what I would call Christian nationalism.
Sure. And that's been an argument against some Trump supporters and even Trump himself. I don't know whether or not it's substantiated, but kind of like that last part saying Christianity is such an important facet of patriotism because of the excellent arguments it makes for the patriotism.
Right.
And I'm not necessarily accusing him of that, but that is an argument that has been made against him and some of the right movement.
Yeah. The point Bonhoeffer makes throughout the movie, and I think in his real life as well, is that the center of any Christian's life must be Jesus.
Yeah.
It cannot be there are no substitutes, except no substitutes, Jesus or bust.
Yeah. I just a plug for a very popular movie, one of my favorites. It won Best Picture back in, I think, 1981, which is the movie Chariots of Fire.
Oh, yeah.
There you have a devout Christian who is faced with a confrontation of his moral beliefs, specifically his conviction that of the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and that he would not compete on Sundays. And he faces the dilemma of being this great athlete who's picked for Great Britain's Olympic team to run, who's a sprinter. And he learns on the journey over, this was in France during, I think, the 30s in Paris. He learns that one of his heats for, I think it's one of the races, is on a Sunday. And he said, I can't run. And the pressure that's put upon him by his, Olympic coaches and everything saying, well, are you not patriotic? You're not, And there you have an instance as like, no, he loves his country, but he loves God more.
Yeah.
And God's law trumps man's law.
Yeah. So I think the reason I don't find any ground within myself for the Christian nationalism claim to be true about me is I love America. I want America to succeed and be great and good. And I think no one knows until the time comes, but I think I'd be willing to give my life for it. But if America fails and is overrun by communism and becomes a hellscape, my hope will not have gone, because my hope is not in America. It's not in Trump. It's not in anybody. It's in Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah. The eternal one.
Amen.
Yeah. This world is passing on and we will pass with it.
Yeah.
The Lord never changes.
Yeah. And Bonhoeffer knew that about Germany.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bonhoeffer loved the German people.
He did.
It's why he was willing to go back when he could have stayed away and protected his life. He went back because he was so concerned about, shepherding German Christians.
Yeah, he was concerned about the welfare of the downtrodden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even before he really knows the problem of Nazism in Germany is a thing,
right?
When he comes back, he's excited just to share the living church that he was shown in Harlem.
Right.
So go see Bonhoeffer. We think it's good. I think it's better than they think, and I'm right.
Yeah. It's not a right-wing extremist film.
It is not.
I don't understand why anybody would say that. I've seen it come up in a few of these essays that have been written disavowing modern depictions of Bonhoeffer. Maybe some of them having some merit, but in this instance, I really don't think so.
Yeah.
No, it's not. I think that there's a cultural objection to Christianity and conservative politics by some. And when conservatives support a film like this, I could see somebody watching a film like this and saying, see, this is why you shouldn't vote for Trump.
Right. I predicted, and I don't know that this has been borne out, but I predicted that the Bonhoeffer movie would see an increase in sales from leftists who thought it's a subtle message about how to deal with Trump. That was my prediction.
Yeah.
We'll be seeing if your prediction is true.
It's made about $10 million at the box office so far, which isn't huge, but it's
I'm not going
terrible.
to call you a prophet yet.
Okay. All right. I'll get there. All right. I guess that's enough for today. This has been our episode on Bonhoeffer. We are the Pop Culture Contrarian with Thomas Sterling and Andrew. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.